Hi, welcome back to your guided notes for the HTE 4730 Hospitality Negotiations and Sales. I'm Cynthia Vanucci, here to wrapping up some of our chapters in the conflict management book. We are now entering chapter 12, where we'll be talking about principles of persuasion. Gosh, when we talk about this subject matter, um, I'm always a little hesitant because I don't want people to think that persuasion and manipulation are in the same camp because they're not. Persuasion will go into a lot more depth. There's a lot more of the theoretical components. But to be persuasive, you must really believe in what you are negotiating about and that you're doing it in good faith, with good character, and also that you're genuine in the process. So we have this thing in chapter 12 called social judgment theory. It's found on page 167. And I guess in this aspect, we really need to work with those definitions again. We'll be talking about the word attitude describes positive or negative or good versus bad. You've heard people say this. Oh, they have a bad attitude, or they have a good attitude. Um, and obviously this is a part of that perception of how people see you. That's why we always try to be more upbeat or positive in our negotiations process, because it says you have a good attitude. And also it's like being a good sport and sportsmanship, and you hear about people who are bad sports on the who have bad sportsman's conduct on the field, and we tend not to like them as people as a result of their bad sportsmanship. So the word opinion, now this is different than attitude. Your opinion describes your position. We get opinions on issues of politics, we get opinions on issues of religion, um, but an opinion actually describes your position. And I have a great deal of respect for people who are have a strong conviction to their opinion and back it up with action. Oh, I'm a feminist. I don't mean to make it sound like that's a negative thing. I happen to be a feminist and actually stood away from that because I was afraid that if I told people I was a feminist, they would think I was, some crazy person out there always, waving my fist for women's right. But a feminist meaning that for me, that I wanted equality in all sense of the word, in terms of my job, in terms of how I was paid, in terms of how I was perceived. So, you may now have an opinion about me because I have a very strong passion on that position. Then there's a belief. These beliefs are what one knows to be true. And I have to say, we each have very strong beliefs. And when you're negotiating, you're looking at these three things. You're looking at that attitude, you're looking at the opinion, and you're looking at the beliefs of something. And all those three come together to make what we call the social judgment theory, found on page 167. Okay, we have two perspectives, and one is the latitude of commitment. Um, People, when we talk about a latitude of commitment, it's how strongly they feel about an attitude or a belief, and they're very firm in those in those beliefs. The second one is the latitude of non-commitment, indifference. Some people will use that like in a poker face, so like they have a really good hand, but they have a real indifferent facial expression, so that there's no enthusiasm about the hand. I say that because when I was in college, I really couldn't play poker, and the reason why I say that is I was like a neon light. I could never have this non-commitment or indifference facial expression, and that's kind of important in the negotiations. You really have to kind of keep what I call a bit of a blank slate. Okay, so we are going for an acronym here called ACES on page 172. ACES, going for ACES. And what does that mean? Well, the first one, what it stands for is one is appropriateness. Appropriateness, and I'm looking at my definition here just to make sure I don't screw it up, is arguing that the right thing to do. Appropriateness. This is the right thing to do. When we talk about um, negotiating a contract, let's say, the right thing to do would be not to gouge on prices, right? And let me kind of give a further explanation of that. So when I was working in the hotel business, we had certain times of the year in Las Vegas, in particular. When I worked in Las Vegas, we had certain times of the year where we had an opportunity just to charge ridiculous rates because people wanted to come into Las Vegas and do their New Year's celebration in Las Vegas. Well, what was appropriate? Well, the demand was high, so it's appropriate that I would charge my maximum room rate. We have a maximum room rates in the hotel business. It was called the rack rate. It was the highest rate that I could charge. And if the demand was that great, I would charge it. The appropriateness. We wanted to make sure that people weren't just coming in for New Year's Eve and checking out New Year's Day. We were looking to expand that revenue opportunity. What was appropriate? Well, for us in Las Vegas, a 3-night minimum seemed appropriate. A 4-night was stretching it too long. That the demand wasn't there for the customer. The next part is the consistency. When someone is doing an argument of consistency, they're talking about what's fair. In this case, it appeals to the sense of a person's justice and fairness. Probably the area that you might understand better than anybody. If you have siblings, there's a consistency that you ask for with your parents, right? And the oldest child, I have 3 kids, so my oldest child would tell you that I was tougher on her than I was on her younger sister and younger brother, that I wasn't always consistent as a parent, and that didn't seem fair to her. My argument to my daughter was I was consistent based on the personality of the individual child, but there were certain rules I was consistent about. I mean, they all had to brush their teeth at night before they went to bed. They all had to take swimming lessons. As far as I was concerned, that was like a rite of passage. My children had to know how to swim. So there were consistencies in my parenting style. There has to be consistencies in how I grade students, which is why after years of teaching, I developed these grading rubrics, which I'm really flattered my colleagues throughout the department have all adopted, because it makes it easier for me to grade a student with elements of fairness, that you're going to lose a point here if you don't staple the cover sheet to the paper. You're going to lose a point if you don't double space. You're going to lose a point for misspelled words. This helps a teacher to be more objective in her grading. So that's how I developed that consistency. The next one is effectiveness. Um, you know, According to the book, the effectiveness is found in an outcome desired by, it's desired in all solutions and brings out the best results of the party. So what they're essentially saying in this definition is, and this term probably gets a little overused, it becomes a win-win. So many times an effective negotiation, both people walk away from the negotiation feeling that there was an element of fairness to it. There was an element of they didn't feel gouged, they didn't feel taken advantage of. And I'll tell you, this probably is about 25 years ago, I was involved with a lawsuit. And in that lawsuit in the state of Texas, they required that we go into arbitration. And arbitration said, before you go into the courtroom, we're going to ask that the parties come together and try to come up with the best result for all parties. So you have one party that's really upset about something, so they're usually suing in civil court over monetary things. And so what happens is that the arbitrator is attempting to say, look, if you go to court, this could get very expensive. Why don't we just settle and minimize or mitigate our financial risks here? And so that way both parties don't feel that they're totally taken advantage of, and they both walk away thinking, okay, one gave a little, one took a little, and it seems to be what I call a best result for all parties. The next one is special things. There are, when you're negotiating and you have an individual across the table, there are certain hot buttons for them. And there are certain circumstances that will make the negotiating a little tough for them. In the case of a meeting professional who has been had a very bad experience in attrition, let's say, they want to really argue, or not so much argue, but really negotiate that point about how can you be more flexible with your attrition, because this is a special circumstance to them. It costs their company a great deal of money, so they're really going to hone in on that particular thing, that particular circumstance that they want to be involved with in the negotiations. The next acronym, which is found on page 173 to 177 of your textbook, is Crossing the Creek. And CREEK is another acronym that stands for Common Ground, Reinforce, Emotional Connection, Empathy, and Keeping Your Credibility. So I just gave you those definitions of common ground, reinforce, emotional connection, empathy, and keeping your credibility. So common ground. Many times when I'm negotiating with people, or when students come in and they want to negotiate the points that might have been taken off, or what happened in terms of their why they couldn't get their homework in, we try to reach a common ground. What does that mean? I always want the student to know that they can come in and see me, right? But you find common areas where both parties can have a good outcome. Obviously, the student wants maximum points, and me, I don't want to give out maximum points for a quality of work that may or may not be there, or that could have been late. So I developed some common ground. And the common ground is, look, I show them, well, you can earn extra credit in this area that would help make up for points that was lost. I'd be happy to reevaluate and regrade. So that's common ground outcomes. They don't necessarily get everything they want, but at least they have a sense that the teacher is A, willing to regrade and reconsider, and B, oh, don't forget there's extra credit opportunity. The next one would be reinforce with supporting facts and data. You know, sometimes in my syllabi, they seem so long-winded, and it's just because after years of teaching, I try to accommodate what are all the things, what are the stumbling blocks for students and for me, and I want to reinforce them. So I always say, here's some supporting fact information and data. A supporting fact would be, you've known about this assignment since the first portion of the semester, and here is that information very clearly pointed out in the syllabus. That's a fact. And the data aspect that I use, many times I'll say, well, there were, and this has happened to me, I'll say, gee, there were an awful lot of students who didn't do well on this assignment. And the data says to me that too many of them weren't doing well on the assignment, that I have to go back and reassess. So that's reinforcing and supporting facts and data. The emotional connection. So many times in an emotional connection, when you're trying to persuade, there's elements of enthusiasm and there's elements of trying to be understanding. What I try to do is make a connection by telling them, saying I understand where they come from, and give an example of why I understand where they come from. In my case, one of the emotional connections I have with students is when a student may not be doing very well in my class, I will tell them, look, there was a period of time in my life that I didn't do very well in school. Not because I wasn't intelligent, not because I wasn't capable, but I was just really disconnected from the homework assignment. I was unmotivated by it. And I tried to make this connection with them to let them know, all is well. And this is just one class or one assignment, and we can move beyond that. The next one that I talk about is empathy, and I think I kind of related that with my emotional connection. I can have total empathy for a student on the pressures of what they have when they're going through school, because I too went through them. I was that working student. I went to UNLV and at the hotel school, and I worked odd hours as a front desk clerk and as a hostess, and there were just times that I understood. I totally understood. However, you never want to cross the line to total sympathy. And the reason why I say that is you still have a job to get done. And let me give the example of a few years back, I had cancer. And I'm really happy that I survived cancer and that I still get to teach. And because cancer can be mean, but it doesn't mean that cancer always kills you. It just means it's mean and ugly. And the empathy that I can say to my surgeon, I'm glad that he was sympathetic, or that he had empathy, that he was going to cause me pain and it was going to be uncomfortable. But I still needed him to do the job and cut that big cancerous tumor out.